is a new format that we're all attempting to get used to. So thank you very much for taking the time to come out, hear what we have to say, and hopefully what we have to say today will enable you to get a greater understanding of franchising as an industry as a whole, as well as VetCor franchising itself. So thank you very much. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thanks, guys. So I guess the biggest thing is to know that we have been in your shoes before. And so what we try to do is tailor this presentation to what makes sense for you. So I've started at kind of the cloud level, and just recognizing that you may not even be firmly decided about franchising. So some things that maybe help plant seeds about to help you think about whether this is a good option, if it is, and what type of franchise, et cetera, et cetera. Also, because the name of our company is VetCor and our mission is to create sustainable and meaningful employment opportunities for our nation's heroes, we've gotten connected with a lot of veterans in the past. And because we're stationed in Tampa, MacDill, it's the only base in the United States with 2 4-star level headquarters. I end up talking to a lot of senior folks. And so VetCor really is designed to create opportunities more for kind of the junior enlisted technicians. But now that we're franchising, it's driven one of the reasons we've gone to franchising, creating opportunities for folks like us, fellow Service Academy career graduates. And so some of these lessons I've learned is really from the last several years, just trying to help veterans in transition in general. So with that, let me get started. I'm going to run, let's share my screen, and then, okay. So I think everybody should have the slides now. If you don't, and by the way, Mike is right next to me here trying to grab any questions or see any comments that you have so I can focus on the presentation.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll use this as a basis. And I'm not a big PowerPoint guy, but I think it's helpful to try and just get started and use as a guide and a record of what we covered. So, because I'm still a retired military officer, I have to have an agenda. So there's the things that we're going to cover. So really, what's important, I started asking people, just like I was asked when I transitioned, what do you want to do? And I transitioned that to what's important to you. And so let me talk about the difference between these two things really quickly. What I found is most people were like me and didn't really know what they wanted to do. And so when you ask questions about what do you want to do, inevitably you get things like, well, how much compensation do you want? What position, title? I commanded a battalion, so that was equivalent to a CEO, things like that. Some people don't even know what industries, where they want to be, et cetera, et cetera. So then I started asking people, what's important to you? And start with that first. And inevitably, I hear things like quality of life, no more deployments. A location, I want to be in the Southeast. I want to be in Florida because close to family, things like that. But then I would hear things like, the mission and the purpose of the organization. I've got to do something important. I want to be part of a team bigger than myself, cultures, norms, and values. I want to be around teammates that share similar values, things like that. And as I've now walked through this for the past, I guess almost 7 years of helping veterans, I found that what's important to you is a much better place to start, but then narrows it down as you start to network and research and things to what do you want to do in finding those opportunities. Because what I've also found is when you ask people like us, what can they do? You get things like, well, I can do anything. Because oftentimes we have in the military, we've taken a battery commander and turned them into, provincial reconstruction team or, a MIT team leader or something like that. And but the challenge is people in the outside world just don't understand that. The other thing I would say is, big warning, don't let your ego get in the way. And one of the biggest mistakes I've seen is people say, well, whatever I do, I want to at least make what I'm making now in the military. And I will tell you, I think that in general, the average senior military officer is overpaid compared to their peers in a peer group. Now, if you take, and the same thing is true with senior NCOs too. Junior officers are probably about right, but anyway, that's really just a false. That has everything to do with your ego and nothing to do with your skill sets and your demand in the new civilian world you're transitioning to. So just be careful about that. As we transition to that, then it seems to make sense, and I found this this graphic that I think really gets to what I call the sweet spot. And if you can figure out what's important to you and you define what you really love doing, what the world needs, what you can get paid for, and what you're good at, the intersection of all those things in that Venn diagram is kind of your sweet spot. And if you can find that, find it, get it, stick with it, and make it last, because that, I believe, is truly the sweet spot. And if you can't, and what happens is, for example, the Venn diagram explains, if you can find something that you love doing and what the world needs, then that becomes kind of your mission in life. But if you can't get paid for it, maybe perhaps you're independently wealthy and you can still do it. But then you got to interject if you want to get paid, or some people say it's a hobby. And then you got to find things that you're good at as well. So I really think that's a good way to start your approach into what type of company, big, small, Fortune 500. Am I going to be a business owner? If so, I'm going to be a business owner. I'm going to start from scratch, an entrepreneur, a franchise owner, buy an existing business, start a business. All those things are different. And I think this slide, perhaps, and this discussion, perhaps helps you with that formulation. What I did here is I just filled and these slides will be available to you. I just filled these in for VetCor because I use this when I talk to specific people who are interested in becoming a potential franchisee on our team or in our teammates. So it's kind of my explanation of why I do what I do, and hopefully you'll find it useful or not, and then it tells you, well, franchising isn't a sweet spot for you. And so let me go into some of the basics of franchising, which I think is why we're all here. In its essence, franchising is the right to use the brand and intellectual property, typically in a specific geographical area for a specific purpose. So we started VetCor, the brand, we have the trademark, we have the intellectual property, operations, how we do it, all those types of things. We license it to a franchisee. In our case, we use protected territories that are defined by zip codes, oftentimes by counties, but by zip codes that says you now can be the VetCor person in this specific territory and do these specific things. So that's in essence what a franchise is. It's regulated by the federal government to some extent and somewhat by some states, and they're called the registration states. The other thing is that you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself. So if you're the franchisee of a local McDonald's, you own that business, you borrow, if you will, or you license the intellectual property and the brand, but you don't report to the CEO of McDonald's. You report to yourself. You form another company. In our case, Mike's one of our franchisees, as well as our VP of Business Development. So he started at Black Knight Ventures, LLC. He's the CEO of that company and doing business as VetCor of Sarasota, Florida. So he's part of the team. He shares lessons learned, but I can't tell him, hey, Mike, you need to open your office at 10 o'clock. He gets to make all those decisions. Now, what I can do is punch him in the nose if he does something that helps, that screws with the brand or something like that, and I have legal ramifications. But generally, if you go through the vetting process and you're with the right fit, there's no issues with that. So it's really, you're in business for yourself, you're making all those financial decisions, et cetera, but you've got a team to help out. The other thing, and this is one of the selling points that I talk about now as we've expanded VetCor into franchising, is it's really about training, standardizing, and replicating. As I've now talked to other businesses, and we're a restoration company. We do water damage, mold remediation, things like that. And I can talk for days about VetCor itself, but what I said was really now our 3 organic offices that we have in South Florida now, that's part of our business, but now we're a franchising company. And franchising isn't about restoration at all. It's a whole new business industry. And when I'm talking to executives from insurance carriers who are our clients, because I want to grease the skids for them opening more territories to my franchisees, is to say, what is franchising? Well, it's really training, standardizing, and replicating. And oh, by the way, anybody know an organization or institution that's better at training, standardizing, and replicating than the U.S. military? Then they usually get a chuckle. So it's one of the reasons why I think veterans do so well in transitioning into franchising, because they understand how to take an SOP. And what the civilian world thinks is that you rotely follow it. And that's obviously not the case. But you're nested within commander's intent. You understand commander's intent 2 levels above, and you make it better. So you have this core model, intellectual property, operations, et cetera, and you replicate it. The other thing franchising does is it brings you existing relationships. And through the School of Hard Knocks, I learned a lot of lessons, mostly in areas that I was not familiar with as a leader in the military. So the manning, training, equipping, that kind of stuff, no problem. And I think from, I've got my peers beat in those areas, if you will, in institutional knowledge. But in things like financing, insurance, marketing that I had no experience in, I had no knowledge in. And so now if you join a franchise, you get the benefit of the relationships of existing businesses. So the franchisor will often introduce you to someone who can provide you the insurance you need. And so you don't have to worry about vetting that company, that business, et cetera. And as an example, I went through, I think, 4 different insurance agents in the first 7 years in business because they just didn't understand what we were trying to do. So you get those types of relationships for your business operations, right? And also business revenue. So as I mentioned, we're a preferred vendor for 60 insurance carriers. And so when you turn the lights on for a VetCor franchise, we've gone through the process to vet you and prepare you so that you can earn revenue on day one based on the relationships that we have with the existing insurance companies in the state of Florida and frankly throughout the United States. So you have those types of business relationships for bringing in revenue and operations, and also for support, administration, logistics. We introduce you to our PEO. It's a professional employer organization that can handle your payroll, your HR administration, et cetera. And then you also want to take that and develop your own relationships based on the brand that you have, albeit VetCor or McDonald's or whatever, and you go to your local chamber of commerce, in our case, insurance agents, you do other business to business locally, hand out coupons or flyers for events, support local events. In our case, we encourage our franchisees to support veteran events and things like that. But the format of all those relationships, the backbone starts with the franchisee and the brand that kind of nationally and regionally translates, and then also then allows you to form your own local relationships based on that same brand. So, okay. It comes with a recipe for success. You have tried and true operations. And so you get a series of training and the operations manual to follow. And again, I think the civilians out there kind of don't understand that. They think that we just, we're trained to follow orders and we're robots. And so that's what we do. That's not the case. And what I used to tell my company commanders as a battalion commander is you will see opportunities long before I ever will. So long as you're operating within my intent, I want you to execute violently and follow those opportunities. And it's kind of, that's the same way. It's one of the reasons why I've chose the franchise manual to expand VetCor. And I think it just works really well, particularly with people like us who have those experiences. And then the other piece is then you get the benefits of lessons learned from your franchisee to the left and to the right, through annual conferences, through quarterly calls, through franchise councils, franchisee councils. you get all the benefits of the lessons learned and continuous improvement through the network, right? But what you don't necessarily get, and you can share those freely because they're not, because of the rules with franchising, the right to use in specific areas, right? They're not your competitors. And so you can freely share things and not have to worry about your own intellectual property being stolen because you're not a competitor. You're actually a teammate, which I think is another kind of aspect that makes it really attractive to people like us, because we say, hey, the pie can get bigger for all of us. And while we like competitiveness and we're really good at competitiveness, we prefer teamwork. And that's what a franchise network allows. So you can still succeed as a kind of capitalist in your own area and, and control your own destiny, but also be part of something bigger than yourself and help others succeed to your left and to your right. So let me pause there and see, Mike, do we have any questions or anything yet? Okay. So I'm not okay. Oh yeah, and the in its essence, the franchise disclosure document, the FDD. And that's typically, it is a standard document with 24, 29 paragraphs, something like that. It's standard. Every paragraph is the same. Say only 24 paragraphs. It turns out most of them are like 200 pages. But what that does is that covers the federal requirements that must be disclosed for any company that's going to franchise. The one in particular you got to pay attention to, it's the one that everybody asks, how much money can I make? Franchisors can't make those false promises. They can't make any promises to you with respect to how much revenue you can make. They can only tell you what they disclose in item 19, which is paragraph 19, which is, here is our financials for last year or whatever. In our case, because we're such a young franchisor, what we've done is we just aggregated the 3 offices that were owned by our own organic company. Some will do unit financials. It's completely up to the franchisor, but that's the only thing they're allowed to talk about with disclosure with respect to revenue, how much money you can make. So you should know that, and then understand, research the FDD. What I will also tell you is, for most franchises, if you're interested in them, franchisors, and there are 2 states, and it escapes me right now. One is Minnesota, and there's another one that is, if you franchise in those states, you have to file your FDD publicly. If you're interested, I can get you the information. And because those are easy states to franchise in, most franchisors then offer franchises in those states. As a result, you can go to those websites for those states and just pull down, anybody can, the FDD for whatever franchise you're looking for. And it's not widely known, but it's an easy way to do research. And if you're interested specifically, we can get that information to you. But allows you to study the FDD and ask the right questions. Somewhere along the process, if you start, for example, with VetCor or any other franchise, you will be issued the FDD. And once you are, you can't buy a franchise until you've had 14 days to review it. So it's kind of like a buyer beware type thing. But the franchisor must provide it to you officially. You sign for it in receipt, and then that starts the 14-day clock before you can do a transaction. So if you want, you can take more than 14 days, you just can't do less. All right, I'm going to switch gears a bit and just talk about kind of some personal lessons learned, and they are the 2 greatest challenges of starting a business and then overcoming those challenges for me. And I think it corresponds very clearly to us, because we have similar DNA, similar backgrounds, similar experiences. The first one was getting the business. So you can figure out how to make the best widget in the world, how to create the best service to clean that widget, or to somehow service someone's home or whatever. But until you can find the market for that widget or that service, you can't make any money. And that's really marketing 101. And for us, sometimes that's hard to do, because it has to do with there's a difference between marketing and sales, but for us still, it almost feels dirty sometimes that we're trying to sell our souls. So the good thing about, I think, a franchise is you've got the brand, and all you have to do is really tell the story. So they've already figured out how to do this, and you just follow that SOP. For us, it's really easy because we're on a mission. And so our mission is, to create sustainable, meaningful employment opportunities for our nation's heroes. So what I tell people, though, is there's a fine line here. I'm not asking for handouts. I'm not asking for your business, and this is how I market, to show you an example of this, because we're veterans. But because we're veterans, we show up fit, polite, on time, in uniform, treat you with dignity and respect. Then I ask them a simple question, when's the last time you had a service provider of any kind come to your house? Whether it's the cable guy, air conditioning repairman, when did they tell you they were going to be there? And inevitably, I know the answer. It's, a 4-hour window, 8 to 12, and they showed up late or whatever. So that's just an example of how I've tried to overcome those obstacles of getting the business. I figured out ways to tell our story that really isn't transactional, but it's relationship based. And so it's one of the reasons, probably the primary reason, we've had such great success, and we have a really good cause to do that. So getting the business, though, is in my opinion, harder than actually executing the business itself. So if you focus on relationships, not transactions, that helps. For us, as I mentioned, we don't want any handouts, but we're focusing on what our mission is. And then we just tell the story, present the facts, our unique selling position. And for us, it's all about veterans and that different just level of service offering that veterans provide. For veterans, showing up on time is late and early is on time, et cetera, et cetera. The other lesson I've learned is the second greatest challenge is financing the business. And if you do well, and most people here, because you're a Service Academy graduate, are high achievers, and you're going to do well. And if you don't understand the implications of cash flow, and I'll just give you an example, as we've experienced pretty significant growth, particularly last year we didn't have a hurricane, but the 3 previous years we had a hurricane. That was command and control 101. We clearly outkicked our coverage and did really well. Well, what happened is we earned, in a course of about 2 months, $2 million in revenue. That took about 6 months, over 6 months to collect, because the volume of that administration, that this insurance carriers were not ready, and nobody's ready to process that. Well, guess who had to pay for all the labor and all the expenses of that up front? So even though we had great success, it almost bankrupt and killed my company. Success did, because I didn't understand the first year. Now, the first year we took a really small bite. We deployed to Jacksonville for only one insurance carrier. So the first year we made like $320,000 in 11 days. So that was tough, but I was able to endure through that. The second 2 years, I withdrew money from my IRA, and part of the challenge is as a small business startup, you have very little access to credit. So this year now we have a line of credit finally. It's really taken us 6 years to establish a line of credit. It's hard to get credit cards as a small business. You're really reliant on your personal credit. I think Mike will tell you that too. I'm frankly still maxed out on many of my personal credit cards because I can afford it because of my military salary, or my military retirement, and VA disability, et cetera. But that's what I had to do to get to the financing piece of the business to enable the growth that we experienced. So when you look at a typical timeline of a job for us, we get the job today. It takes a day worth of labor and then 3 days of plugging equipment in, letting things dry out, et cetera. And then we estimate it another day, then we submit it. And typically our timeline to get payment from the insurance companies is 39 days. So we're talking anywhere from 45 to 60 days from when I expend as the owner the resources to 60 days when I get paid and reimbursed for those resources. Well, for us, that could be 3, maybe 4 payroll cycles. And that's the piece that I didn't understand, because I never had to worry about that as a battalion commander or deputy commander of a district. I wasn't making my payroll. Uncle Sam was. So again, those are the two things to think about. And I think there are some huge advantages to franchising that helps a new business owner overcome those challenges. So here, I'm just going to go through what the expectations are for us of a franchisee. And I think these are pretty standard across the board for any franchisor to their franchisees. You know, we definitely want you to be a brand ambassador, uphold and even expand the brand in your territory. We absolutely want you to make money, right? Because the way we make money is based on a gross revenue of percentage of your, a royalty revenue of your percentage of sales. So we want you to be an independent small business owner and making money and succeeding wildly, because the more wildly you succeed, the more wildly we succeed. It's a very symbiotic relationship. For us, we want you to be a staunch veteran advocate and a community leader. Most franchisors have some type of cause, the successful ones nowadays, and there's some interesting reading on that as you transition about businesses that are really succeeding in today's economy that have some type of corporate social responsibility. And for us, it's obviously it's attached to veterans causes and creating opportunities for veterans and supporting the transition of veterans. I just be careful with that though. You know, you're making your independent decisions as a franchisee, as a business owner, but be careful. You have to vet all of those things very closely, particularly in the veteran space. Now, there's a ton of people that want to do a lot of great things. You just have to be careful about that, because we don't want our name, our brand associated with something that then goes south or is exposed as fraud or things like that. We absolutely want to share good ideas shamelessly, sharing them willingly, continuous improvement across the system. I think that's a huge, huge advantage for VetCor in particular, because we all understand, you know, an AAR, what happened, why did it happen, how you can improve. And it's just the culture that we came from in the military. And then we want you to communicate in all directions, you know, up, down, sideways, etc. Some significant don'ts: don't do anything to screw up the brand, ever. That's the one thing that will really put you in bad graces with your franchisor. If you do something stupid, if you end up with you know, a negative press article about something that happened, and then don't be, if you're interested in franchise, becoming a franchisee, understand that there's a difference between a franchisee, a small business owner, and an entrepreneur. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. If you want to be an entrepreneur, don't be a franchisee, because you have to follow their script and things. And you can't really, you can succeed even more wildly by continuing to purchase additional territories, but it's not something that you can see very good growth and be very, build significant wealth in your life. But this isn't something where you're developing the patent, it's your idea, it's your baby, and then you take it and you run with it and you experiment with it and things. You have to follow a process. And so just understand that up front. We definitely want you to be a valued teammate, and we want to have you to have an entrepreneurial spirit and be agile and be valued in that. But that's much different than the guy who has a startup in Silicon Valley because it's their idea and then they go. Okay. What do you get? Also, admin and financial responsibilities. You've got to set up your own company, like I talked about with Mike. It's Black Knight Ventures LLC. You have to set up and maintain your accounting systems, do all the billing, et cetera. We help with that. Typically, you're going to have to submit monthly reports. Your franchisor, we want to make sure you pay your bills on time, so that gets back to reputation, supply chain management. You know, we don't anticipate really having these problems of reporting any territory issues with poaching or anything like that because of who and how we award territories. I think we have a pretty good standard of vetting, and our average franchisee is just different than the franchisee in frankly any system. And then we expect them to call us before we have to call you if we identify something. And it gets back to that open communication. Operationally, you got to execute to standard, and that's nothing different than what we were doing in the military. Because again, our brand is known for timely, quality, reliable service and the value of veterans. If you're not executing to that standard, you're potentially disrupting and doing creating negative equity in the brand of ours. For us, you have to have a 24/7 operational capability. You've got to execute your administrative responsibilities within a claim life cycle. And there are certain things of when you have to submit reports and things like that, because we don't want a franchisee who's an outlier who, with a particular client of ours, say USAA, for example, who's obviously a great fit for us and a great client. We don't want a franchisee out there not submitting their reports on time for a particular claim, because that affects our brand and the reputation of VetCor in particular. And you've got to maintain credentialing, yearly credentialing. Oftentimes for us, it is with our insurance carriers and our TPAs, which are third-party administrators. We want you to promote the brand through exceptional customer service, come up with even better ideas, and then rapidly respond to any issues. We actually have and we're refining it, CCIR. I have a CCIR, Commander's Critical Information Requirements, which is now CEO's Critical Information Requirements for our company, our organic 3 offices, as well as our franchises. And it's another thing in the military that I think translates really well.
Okay, so we have number of participants back or no?
Yes, we have people back.
Okay.
So I know one of the questions that came up was, is there the availability for Oconus franchises?
A number of for Oconus, no, not at this point in time.
Okay.
For us, as specifically a franchise, I don't think it has the same type of appeal, and we don't have the same ability because of our relationships that translate across the United States for insurance carriers, the insurance industries, which is kind of our model with a business-to-business client, which is where we get our work. It doesn't work currently. Is it something that we could explore? I mean, I'd be happy to explore it with someone. They can still have the same type of IP and processes. The challenges that wouldn't be getting kind of the same bang for the buck with respect to those relationships I talked about.
Okay. Another question that came up was, if an individual owns the franchise, but then wants to move into another area, what's his options? Does he have to sell it? Does he hand it over to somebody else, or what?
Yeah, it all depends on I didn't mention this, one of the subsections of the franchise disclosure document is the franchise agreement. And the franchise agreement is the contractual mechanism that sets up essentially the contract of how that works. So it really depends. For us, I don't even know that we have something in our franchise agreement that covers that. It certainly is doable. You can, one aspect is you can sell the franchise back to the franchisor. You can sell it to another potential franchisee. Typically, and with us is the case in the franchise agreement, we have to approve that. There's a vetting of that. You could buy another franchise, the new territory. So there's all kinds of ways that could happen, and it really depends on the legal ramifications of kind of how it is currently in the franchise agreement that he would sign with the franchisor. And then everything is subject to negotiation as well.
Okay. For our attendees, anybody have any other questions at this point? Just put it in the Q&A or put it in the chat part, and we'll answer it right now. Other than that, I know we got cut off there, Paul. Anything else you wanted to communicate? I think you were getting close to the end of your presentation, but in case.
Yeah, we were. We were actually on the last slide. We went through most of the stuff. What I really want to make sure people understand is we've been in your shoes. We are happy to follow up with anybody on this call to talk generically about franchising, about transition, frankly. Miguel, how passionate I am about this, because of my background, I went from command and battalion to being the director of training at the engineer school and focused on credentialing and those types of things. That's really what stirred my passion about helping vets in transition. So I'm happy to talk to anybody here, any service academy grad, about transition in general, about franchising in general. Obviously, you know, our business is VetCor and franchising VetCor. I'd be happy to talk to you about that, but please don't feel obligated. It's not a quid pro quo. It's not a, this, you know, we're only going to talk to you about that. We want to help, and that's part of our mission. The other thing I'll mention is we just did a pretty significant pivot for VetCor. We're a licensed mold remediator. And what we found is the procedures required to do mold remediation are almost exactly the same as what's required to do deep cleaning and disinfecting, application of disinfectants to kind of make it safe for companies to return back. So we just made that pretty significant pivot. In Florida, there's still a safer at home order in place, but we're looking at ways to expedite franchise opportunities to take advantage of that. It's not, we want to be very careful. We're not ambulance chasers. We want to help. And it is a way. We've studied all the CDC guidance. There's been guidance from the Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, our governing body. And we've taken that, really our chief operating officer, who's retired sergeant major, dear friend of mine, taken that and created our own SOPs now. And so, you know, I think we have a huge opportunity in the next 6 months to get, if anybody is interested in franchising, to get expedited in that with a completely new revenue stream, augmenting the restoration work that we'll have. And that's something that's actually a fairly easy sell locally to companies. So
Okay.
yeah, it's another differentiator for us.
I've got two quick questions that popped up, and they're kind of similar, so I'll read them both. What are the startup costs for a VetCor franchise, and how do you feel about franchises that require you to have a certain net worth versus others that want you to simply pay a base operating deposit? Because as you mentioned, cash is hard to find for your transitioning officers. Franchise,
yeah.
and the third one, do your franchise need access to capital outside of SBA loans?
All good questions. Let me make sure I get them all. What it takes to start VetCor, our franchise fee for veterans and immediate family members is $35,000. That is the lowest in the franchise, in the restoration industry of any franchise, any restoration franchise. And then our royalty fee is 7%, and that's pretty much an industry average kind of standard. So we've done that to try and make the barrier to entry as low as possible. That's a $10,000 discount. You can be a franchise owner and not be a veteran and or immediate family member, but then the fee is $45,000. So that's the initial fee. The startup cost then really is a menu, and it's intentionally a menu because it really depends on whether you want to buy your equipment or you want to lease your equipment. And it's all outlined, and it's another thing that's outlined in the FDD, by the way. In general, what I would tell you is, all in, it's in the neighborhood of $150,000 is what you could do. And what we have, we've developed this relationship with a financial agency, My Military Loan, I believe. They have an SBA package that's $150,000 for darn near any transitioning veteran. And so because we're an approved SBA franchisor, you can get that, and it makes it very easy to walk into this without any savings at all. And again, you want to make sure any business owner typically wants to have at least 2 months operating expenses in the bank at any given time. And that's included in the kind of the 150 startup cost, if you will. So it gets to the next question, I think, was something about net worth. Yes, absolutely. That's hugely important. Why is it important? Because of the cash flow issues that I talked about and the things that make it so difficult to get credit. Now, it's difficult to get credit, but it's not necessarily difficult to get SBA funding if you're an SBA approved franchise. And what we kind of walk people through is how to develop a pro forma that then they can use to get an SBA loan. But what we have to ensure is to protect the brand, right? And any franchisor has to protect the brand. So they don't want franchises to fail. Why do most businesses fail? Because they're undercapitalized. And how do you check to make sure they're not undercapitalized? It's based on the individual net worth, frankly, and the amount of liquid assets somebody has, so that we ensure that they have 2 months operating capital in the bank, for example. They have enough to either lease or purchase all of the equipment that they need, et cetera. So it's really about just setting them up for success. So those requirements aren't that substantial, particularly if you have access to an SBA loan, or you're going after an SBA approved franchisor. And they're not really significant. Now there are, you get into restaurants where you got to buy your building and all that kind of stuff, and the upfront costs are pretty significant. Then the net worth requirements are pretty significant. Did I miss anything else? Was there something else there that I was supposed to answer, Miguel?
No, that pretty much covered it. So we're pretty much at, the time limit that we have.
Yep.
If you have like an email or a way for people to contact, if you want to go ahead and give that out, if people want to reach out to you.
Yeah, so our website is www.vetcor, VETCOR services.com or vetcorfranchising.com. My personal email is first initial last name PHUSZAR at VetCor Services, VETCOR services.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, so any social media. Reach out to me. Happy to just connect. Like I said, I'm passionate about helping fellow veterans and even more passionate about fellow Service Academy graduates transition. So you can talk to me about transitioning, about franchising, and certainly we'd love to talk to you about opportunities to join our team and expand our revolution of what we're trying to do to create this brand known for timely, quality, reliable service and the value of veterans. So thanks for the opportunity.
On that note, if you have any interest or want to learn more about it, that's where you can go to the vetcorfranchising.com website and just simply put in your contact information and what branch of the military you were in, and I will personally get back in contact with you within 24 hours and answer any questions about things, set up a time to have a discussion, talk about territories, whatever it is about VetCor that you'd like to speak about. More than happy to do so. And Miguel, is it okay if we can send out to you the actual slide deck, so that or some requests for that, and then attach with that both Paul's and my personal contact information?
Sure.
For all those
send that
attendees.
to me. Yeah, we'll include it in the packet where we're going to send out the information of where everybody can get the URL so that they can review the videos. We'll edit it together, the two, so that's just one, and we'll include that. Plus, it's good for me to have it in case any of our USMA grads got any questions. We can just instantly give that to them. So any USMA grads online, you can always reach out to Career Services, and we can connect you up with Paul and Mike instantly in case you missed anything, and we'll be glad to assist you. So again, Paul, Mike, thank you for everything. It's been very informative, and I apologize for the little disconnect we had there, but since you guys were first out of the gate, we got the learning curve there with you on there. So appreciate it. And everybody, there's a lot more seminars coming up. The next one is Demystifying the HR Process, presented by Deloitte, which is scheduled to start at 10:15. So everybody have a great day, and we'll chat to you with everybody later. Thanks.
Thanks, Miguel.
Thank you, Miguel.